Many people have come to quilting to find community. We find ourselves isolated from a change in our job, change in our family structure, or a new neighborhood or home. My next guest, Wendy Chow, moved from her hometown, Perth, Western Australia, to New York City and turned to quilting to fill that void of leaving family and friends. And 4 years later, she has a website, podcast, and a best-selling book, Urban Quilting. So grab your sewing and a cup of tea. And here's my interview with Wendy Chow.
Wendy, we met 2 years ago at QuiltCon in Nashville. And I'm just going to start right at the very beginning. How did you come to quilting?
So it started back in 2015, back in my parents' dining room. That's where my sister spent her free time quilting. So watching that whole process unfold, seeing all these beautiful fabrics, it really kind of sparked my interest there. So I kind of thought to myself like, oh, well, this looks pretty easy. I think I can do this myself. So I taught myself how to quilt with the basics from high school home economics class.
So your sister is a quilter. Are there other quilters in your family?
No, it's just my sister. So she learned how to quilt when she was living in Canberra. And I guess she wanted to pick up something new. So she went to a local quilt store and learned how to quilt. And then she moved back home, back to Perth. And then that's where she then began to turn our parents' dining room into a quilt room.
So when I met you, you had just traveled halfway around the world, or you moved halfway around the world to be with your fiance/husband.
That's right.
And you left everybody you knew behind, your job, everything, and you were in New York City by yourself, but you had decided that quilting was going to be your way of introducing yourself to the US and just building yourself a community while you were isolated. How did you use quilting that way?
Yeah, so when I came to the States, I got married to an American, and I came here at the States with the K1 fiance visa. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the TLC show, the 90-Day Fiance. So that was the visa that I was on. So we got married legally very quickly when I arrived. But then during that period, actually for quite some time, so the first 11 months of living in the States, I wasn't actually able to work or even start my own business. So that's where I had the opportunity to then reconsider my career in the corporate world, but also it allowed me that time to sit down and just put 110% into creating content and building the brand for the Weekend Quilter. And I guess I used quilting as an opportunity for me to then, network and meet other people and see, just to make friends. Because I was fortunate to have friends in New York already, having, doing long distance for nearly 4 years, but I wanted to create my own friends and just not friends through like my husband. So that at least there's some sort of separation there, and then there's some point of interest where I can like talk to him like, hey, this is what I did today. I've met up with this person and that sort of person. But yeah, when I first started quilting, I was very much a very lone wolf, and I was quite shy to begin with as well. Like I was really shy about joining my local guild back in Perth, and I never really had the opportunity to meet with other quilters, and the only two quilters I knew were my sister and my long arm quilter. It was only until the US that's where I actually began to mingle and meet other like-minded people.
So did you reach out through Instagram?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So it was through sort of engaging through like other people's posts, commenting, and then eventually I think I've kind of broke that sort of barrier down, and I felt a bit more comfortable actually DMing people and kind of building that relationship there. When I first moved to the US, I got pretty desperate that I actually signed up for an app for friends to meet up with friends. So having signing up for that kind of also did help break that sort of nerve around contacting and reaching out to people randomly. So, yeah.
So did you enjoy QuiltCon? QuiltCon helped that with your community.
Yeah, it was great. I would say that also opened up a lot of doors and opportunities to, meet with other quilters, and from there, continue to that relationship after QuiltCon.
And you've come so far since then. Now you have a podcast, and now you have a book, The Urban Quilter. You've got a website. How did you take those extra steps to make it more than just a hobby?
Yeah, so I think it's just consistently like being present and, sharing your work and continuing and making things and sharing onto Instagram and just engaging and talking to people. And I think, through that, I was then able to, it opened up other opportunities where I can collaborate with other makers as well. And through the word of mouth and working together, you continuously build a brand and you get noticed more. And then more people want to reach out and work together with you. And from there, as you're continuously showing and sharing your work, just more and more opportunities kind of come your way. So, for example, with the book, that is one thing that I never really considered or ever dreamt that would happen one day. And that opportunity really just came about, was just the publisher seeing my work and just randomly emailing me out of the blue and asked, hey, do you want to jump on a call and see, would you be interested in writing a book?
Do you think you would have ever gone down this avenue if you had not moved and left everybody behind?
Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't have considered it, nor, being forced not to work for like the first 11 months of relocating. I definitely would not have considered this creative career path. And I think with, it was just all timing as well. So I actually received my work 3 days after receiving my work permit. I actually signed the book deal. So if it wasn't for that, I would have just went back and straight to my corporate job, like in a heartbeat.
I am just totally distracted by these colors on your wall here.
The Kona colors.
Do you sit there every day and choose your favorite?
Well, this is actually a new addition. I added this on the weekend. So normally I'd rotate it and I might put on like a new sort of mini quilt on there and just stick it on the wall. But this is a new addition and it's been kind of distracting the past few days.
So do you think you're going to be one of those people that cuts the little blocks up into smaller pieces, or are you going to leave it as one big piece?
Well, okay, so this is actually a fabric swatch. So it's like about 3/4 of a yard. So I don't have any intention in cutting this one up, but I do have the actual like swatch card that folds out. But I keep going back and forth and, do I want to cut it up? Do I not want to cut it up? Because they look so beautiful collectively. So that's like I might consider now that I've got this fabric swatch behind me.
I'm the same way with my color card. I see other people playing with it and think, oh, that's so much fun, but I really like it just being all in one spot and I don't need to manage it as a collective. And I don't need to go put magnets on it or anything like that.
Exactly. And it's just easier to kind of search what colors you want. So if you have like, green colors in mind, you know where to go because they're all there and they're just so nice, all right in front of you that you're able to compare. And like you said, it's just the management of and all the time that you go behind and trying to putting magnets on it and sticking it yeah.
So let's go back to your sister having her sewing room on the dining room table. Was it the color that drew you in first, or do you think it was the math of the pieces, or was it something else?
I think it was the whole process of just, her cutting in all these beautiful fabrics and then putting it all together and then creating this beautiful creation. And then at the very end, when you give it to someone, it's just like really special because, you've taken the time to put something together. And there's just so much thought behind it as well, because, from the fabrics to the design that you pick, that is, you think of it as if like, okay, well, what is that person at the receiving end going to like? Or, what are the sort of colors they like? for example. So yeah, I think that's what really kind of really led me to decide and take up quilting.
Does your sister have a similar color palette to you, or are you quite different?
I think the two of us are kind of similar, where we both like prints and patterns on our like all our fabrics. So if I was to look at her designs, or like the quilts that she makes, I mean, there's just a lot of print and color in it. So that's me as well.
Well, I've been looking at your book here, and one thing that I noticed is that you used 3 very different color palettes when you were explaining the different sizes. How did you arrive at those color palettes that they're so different?
Yeah, so I actually use all the designs in the book. It all started at Prequilt, which is a quilt design web-based app. It all started there. And then, so once I've nailed like a design that I really like, from time to time, I like to play around with their Color Randomizer, which is they're like the sort of like a paint bucket icon, and you click on it and it just randomizes all these different colors. So a lot of the colors from the book is mostly from there, just playing around with different color combinations. And sometimes, just switching out what I get from the Color Randomizer with colors that I do like. And I also like looking at, going through Pinterest and looking at different swatch colors as well, and picking, those sort of colors and incorporating it into my quilts.
Is this an exhaustive list of the patterns that you came up with, or did you have many that made the cutting room floor and these are just your favorites?
So I guess like the whole book writing process, I had a really short period of time to come up with 10 different designs. So I didn't really have like a huge list of, designs to pick from. I just kind of made it as I was going, and then, trying to, with the eye on the time, try to, pump out as much as I could. But, having at the same time, like, being thoughtful about it as well, and, thinking about the story behind it. And I'm not just creating quilt patterns for the sake of quilt patterns, if that makes sense.
Laura from Prequilt and myself, we were chatting about it the other day, and we both love your book. There's just so many wonderful, great designs at a number of different levels. They're not all beginner patterns. And I really like Streets and Avenues. I think I'm going to be making that one for my son shortly.
That was actually the first quilt pattern that I put together in the book. And the whole idea of urban quilting really kind of snowballed from that first design. So when I presented to them, I was like, oh yeah, with this design, it's just really the basics, going back to the real basics of a 9-patch block and exploring that. And like, the design is, the intersecting sort of streets and avenues that make up the grid sort of layout of Manhattan. So from there on, they were like, oh, well, this is a great idea. Maybe, you can sort of express, your like and love for, living in cities and traveling to different cities and experiencing the different cultures and lifestyles in the designs in their book. So that's where it all kind of began from that one.
So in the past year, we've all been very isolated in this world pandemic. It's without saying that you've been probably stuck inside and I've been stuck inside, but there's been lots and lots of people that have come to quilting in the past year that don't have any history of quilting. And what I wanted to talk to you about was, because you have done this yourself, you have moved, you have been isolated before, what kind of strategies would be good for a newcomer to help grow their community?
I think it's just, don't be afraid and just go out there and engage, whether it's through commenting, liking, and just sending just like a DM or reacting to someone's Instagram stories. And from there on, it just kind of rolls out into like a conversation. It could even just be like, I really like the fabrics that you've used. What are they like? Where are they from? Who's it by? And from there, it kind of can just snowball from there. Just like really simple. And quilters generally are really friendly and really nice people. And, maybe you might be stuck on something or you need help or a tip. You can ask someone and generally you would get a response back. And then I think by building these sort of relationships, you just never know what road it could lead you to. So for example, like I've become really good friends with Amanda of Broadcloth Studio and Anna and Max and Wayne Studio, and how that relationship all really started was just through sending comments and to each other, and eventually that led to being conversations. And then look at us now, we've done collaborations together, we've done Quiltmas together, we've done Quilt Buzz. So it leads to big things. And whether it's like a small account or a big account, it doesn't really matter, because these relationships, like I said, you just don't know where it'll end up being.
And how about skill level? Like everybody starts at the beginning. How did you grow your skills when you were isolated in that beginning? Did you just refer to books or YouTube?
So like I mentioned earlier, when I first started quilting, I was very much a lone wolf. And what I did was, kind of learnt the hard way and did some really stupid stuff. Though I must admit, like other people would have done it as well, but looking back on it, they're pretty silly. So I think just through practice and trying out different quilt patterns by different people, and because I guess having different perspectives on how to do something or create something, you learn different techniques and ways of doing it. So for example, the first few quilt patterns that I did, they were like, I did it the long way, and they showed me to cut like thousands of triangles just for like a half square triangle quilt. And then when I actually joined a sew along hosted by Sharon Holland and Maureen, I think it was Crackenell, their patterns had shown me the shortcut. So if it wasn't for that and joining a sew along, and also like meeting other people along that sew along as well and sharing tips and ideas, like if it wasn't for that, then I don't think I'll be able to know and sort of grow as a quilter. So yeah, like I think if you do see a sew along or like a quilt along, like that's a great opportunity to learn and grow your skills, but also meet new quilters and develop new relationships as well.
So now that you've done a sew along or a quilt along, what would be the things that a beginner should look out for it to be the right one for them?
I think just picking something that you do like and enjoy, and I think maybe sort of reading what is going to be included in the sew along. So sometimes the designer or the host might explain like, oh yeah, there's going to be tips and tricks along the way to kind of guide you and show you. And those are great opportunities for you to learn and grow your skills there. And also like, again, that's an opportunity where you get to meet with other people as well and get to know each other and share all the skills and knowledge there.
So you mentioned before Quilt Buzz. Tell me a little bit more about your podcast.
Quilt Buzz, it's a podcast that comes out once every other week, and we interview different members of the quilting community. And these different people, they might be people that own a fabric store, they could be a long arm quilter, they could be a designer or an up and coming designer. Basically, we just want to give people the opportunity, a voice, to share their work, and also an opportunity for everyone in the community to get to know them as well.
And how long has it been running?
Nearly a year. So our first episode came out in March 26 last year. And it actually was a really interesting time to launch a podcast, because that was when we were I think it was like 10 days into the lockdown. So it was kind of, I guess, luck when we launched it. So, because I guess like at the time when we're going into the lockdown, people were looking for like content to consume and figuring out what do they do with their time. So, I mean, what better time but just to launch a podcast then? It was just really a coincidence. So
you had to learn how to quilt. Now you've learned how to run a podcast. Was that a steep learning curve?
A little bit, though, because there's a team of 3 of us, it's actually been really good. I think at the beginning, we were still trying to figure out like, okay, well, what happens next? Like, because we do like, like for example, like we edit, and then what happens next? Like, do we then like send the like short video clip to someone and then preview it, and like figuring out the whole sort of process and unfolding it. took a little while at the beginning, but then eventually we got there, and each of us are assigned like our own little roles. So I'm responsible for the show notes. And then Amanda's responsible for the logistical side, coordinating the interviews with our guests. And then Anna's responsible for editing. So by having all of those little responsibilities, it just makes it a whole lot easier.
So you're an Australian living in New York. Are you connected to the Australian quilting community?
I would say I would definitely be more connected now than I was living in Australia. I would say I discovered more Australian quilters while I was here, because I was more, I guess, like less shy about approaching other people and, creating that connection through Instagram.
Well, going to the Sydney Quilt Show is definitely on my bucket list.
I've been to the Perth one, but the Perth one was really small, and they actually merge it together with as a craft, like a quilting and craft show. So I would say it's probably an 8 or maybe smaller.
Oh, maybe even smaller.
It's really small.
A lot of people don't realize that between Perth and Sydney, there is a lot of empty land.
Well, Perth is one of the most isolated cities in the world. And the flight between Sydney and Perth is probably about 5.5 hours. So it's kind of similar to flying from New York to LA, but LA is a little bit further.
But quilting is really very popular in Australia now. I'm always surprised when they tell me how expensive the fabrics are, though, because I would think that being closer to the mills in Asia, they would be less expensive.
It's actually pretty pricey. And even like, for example, if you were to order fabrics from an online store in the US, your fabrics end up being cheaper than the shipping. So I think that kind of deters people from trying to buy from overseas. So over the years, I've noticed that there's more online stores. So for example, like Scribbly Gum Quilt Co, she's based in Sydney. So she's opened up and she's like introduced more sort of like designer quilt fabrics. So like, for example, art gallery fabrics, like cotton steel, for example, because prior to that, like you'd have to order from, say, somewhere like Fat Quarter Shop or Horn Supply. And again, like the shipping fee just ends up being more expensive than the actual fabric. And then in terms of like, the big box quilting store or like arts and crafts store. So for example, like the Joann's equivalent in Australia, they stock really limited sort of fabrics there, and they're fabrics that have been sitting there for like, if not 1 year, but like for a couple of years, sometimes more than that. So it just makes it a little bit tricky to source fabrics when you want some sort of variety. So I would say, like, since moving to the US, my fabric stash is like more than doubled. It's just the variety, and it's just so easy to source here. And then the shipping fee is just more affordable. So,
well, just being in Canada, I often think of how much easier it would be in the US, where all the shipping's included and everything, and you've just got such big either Fat Quarter Shop or Missouri Star, plus all the smaller ones around you as well. It's so much easier to access. So what's next on your list of things to do? What's coming into 2021? Your book has just come out. You can't go on a book tour, but what kind of promotions are you doing with your book? It's
mostly just all online, and at the moment I'm just taking it in as it is. And if the opportunity does come up, then like I'll do something. So but for now, I don't really have any plans in what else I'm going to do to promote urban quilting. But other than that, it's just more quilt patterns in the horizon and potentially a big project, but I can't mention anything about it.
Secret. Oh, it's secret.
Top secret. Sorry. It's all very top secret in here.
It's all very top secret. Okay. Your favorite colors, have they changed since you've become a quilter?
I like the color red, but I actually don't really work too much with it in my quilts. And I also do like sort of like grays as well, but that again, like doesn't really pop up much in my quilting. So it's a bit weird.
Well, it's not that weird. Like I find if you sat down and you gave a person the palette and say, choose your favorite color, they'll choose that color. But then if you say, choose your 3 favorite colors, they'll choose 3 different ones. The collection of colors that they like to use is usually quite different from their favorite color.
And I would also say, like, you know, the fabrics or the colors that you use in your quilt projects is very different, or generally is different to the colors that you have in your wardrobe. So for example, I really like the bright, big, bold colors in my quilting projects, but as you can kind of see, like in my wardrobe, it's a lot of neutrals. So it's very, very different.
Do you have a favorite quilt?
I would say the favorite quilt I made was for my best friend as an engagement / farewell gift, because at the time she was moving from Perth to Shanghai. And this is one of like the very first few quilts that I made. And I cut like over 1,000 triangles to create this quilt. And that took me the longest. It took me 9 months. And the reason why that was my favorite is because the time it took, but also the whole realization that, oh, like, you know, it shouldn't really take you this long to make a quilt, and there are shortcuts.
Those beginner mistakes that we make.
Yeah.
That was actually one of my very first videos, was my 5 beginner mistakes. And I could probably easily do that 3 or 4 times, because the same thing, you cut out all your fabric right at the very beginning, and you don't even know whether you've cut it out right, but you make these beautiful stacks, and then you realize, oh, maybe I should have.
Yeah.
There's triangle paper. There's all these other wonderful things to make it more accurate.
And the thing is that when I first started, like, I didn't even think about going to look on YouTube or check out blogs. I was like, you know what? Like, the pattern says that, it says that, I'm going to do it. Like, I'm going to figure it out.
I find now one of the very first things I do is I read through the pattern, and I basically redo the instructions for all the shortcuts I know how to do. Like I often cut it differently. I approach it differently, because I think when they make the pattern, so many people go for like the very beginner person that knows nothing, so that it's approachable to everybody. But I actually take it as a personal challenge. How can I make this faster and easier?
Yeah, it is really interesting seeing how like people's different approaches into the one design. Because like you said, there are so many different ways and to kind of approach it and look at it and see if there's a shorter way or a more economical way in approaching it.
So if people want to contact you, where do they find you?
So they can find me on Instagram or Pinterest at the.weekendquilter, or they can find me on my website is the-weekendquilter.com.
Thank you very much for being on the show. I appreciate you taking the time to be here. And I really hope that we are going to be able to have a cup of coffee in person sometime soon.
I'm hoping by 2022 we can travel again without having to quarantine. Would be nice. So yeah. So yeah, hopefully we'll get to see each other then, maybe. Thank you so much.
I just love talking to Wendy. I am always so impressed when quilters lean into their challenges to see where they lead. And I can't tell you how impressed I am with her book, Urban Quilting, and the patterns inside. Each quilt pattern has 3 sizes. I will leave a link to Wendy's website, all her contact info, and where you can purchase her book in the notes below. And I'll also leave a link to the podcast Quilt Buzz. Next up on Karen's Quilt Circle is Kimberly Jolly of the Fat Quarter Shop. We are talking about her YouTube beginnings with the Jelly Roll Jam, all up to the 2001 Serendipity Charity Quilt-Along. You don't want to miss it, so make sure you're subscribed to my channel. Last week, I uploaded Sewing in a Small Space. This is part 4 in my series on Organize Your Sewing Room. And if you missed it, I'll put a link to it in the notes below. And don't forget to check out some of the other interviews on Karen's Quilt Circle as well. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell by the subscribe button so that YouTube notifies you when I make new videos. You can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest at Just Get It Done Quilts. And of course, subscribe to my newsletter on my website at justgetitdonequilts.com. So take care, and I'll see you next time.